Okay, welcome for those joining us here today. Welcome back. I know I've been tied up with other commitments for teaching for the last couple of weeks, but today I want to go over some form changes to the contract, buyer broker agreement, and listing agreement that go into effect on July 1, plus a couple law changes. We'll have more sessions to go over more form changes, etc. But these are and laws, but these are the main ones that affect you. So the way I want to structure this today, law changes and how it reflected in our sales contract, and then the changes to our listing agreement forms and buyer broker agreement forms because of the August 17th date where the compensation can no longer be put in. Now, I want to also tell you that Jocelyn has put in the chat session for you a link where you can download all these new forms from NVAR that take effect July 1. So the first thing I want to discuss is that if you are selling out in Loudoun County puts something in called Airport Impact Overlay District Disclosure. And the state of Virginia took exception to local groups coming out with their own disclosures. So starting July 1st, that will no longer be in effect. But remember, up until July 1st, you need to use that disclosure if you're selling near the Dulles Airport or their local airport out there in Loudoun County. Okay, so what's probably going to happen with this is that we do have a disclosure law in Virginia. There are 7 mandatory disclosures. In order for a locality to make a disclosure, they probably have to go through state legislature and have it added to that. So that should clarify that for us here in Virginia, because if you sell out in Maryland, you know, there's all types of localities that have different requirements. So just be aware that will no longer be in effect. Now, the big one deals with the Virginia Resale Disclosure Act. So I have paragraph 8 pulled up here in our sales contract to reflect the changes. But let's talk about the change first. Beginning July 1, the requirement that the seller must order the documents and deliver it is back in effect. You may remember that last year when they made changes to this POA Condo Act and came out with 55.12308, the Resale Disclosure Act portion of this, somebody forgot to type in the paragraph that said a purchaser could not waive receipt of the documents. So technically, if somebody had written that in their contract, they had waived it. That will be back into full force and effect on July 1. They cannot be waived. Now, the only way they can waive it is if you look at 8A5, the right to receive the resale certificate and the right to cancel the contract or waive conclusively if not exercised before settlement. So if your buyer goes to settlement without receiving the documents, they have waived them. Now, here is the really big change, okay? Prior to July 1, your purchaser has 3 days by law, which can be extended up to 4 days to review the documents and void them. Beginning July 1, it is completely negotiable. It can be 0 days, it can be 20 days, it can be whatever buyer and seller agree to. Okay? And they've also changed the law to define the first day starts the day after delivery. So now, if you receive the documents on Monday and you had 3 days to review, then your first day starts on Tuesday. Okay, so let's take a look at the language changes in this paragraph, and let's just do the paragraph. The seller represents that the property is or is not located within a development that is subject to the Virginia POA Act, or located in a development subject to the Virginia Condo Act. Now remember that there are 3 laws, or actually 4 if you throw in co-op, but there are 3 laws that would govern a contract if there was a POA and a condo. And each law is still in effect. So you still have the 37 pages of the Condo Act and the 17 pages of the POA Act, but also you have this separate law for the resale disclosure. So we have all 3 would be governing it if there were multiple associations. So the Resale Disclosure Act requires the following language. So the only language in a sales contract is the mandatory required language from the acts. But it doesn't mean the entire POA and condo acts are not still in place. So you need those to know those also. And if you want to check them out, you can go to DPOR website, hit real estate, and all this is on that site. Okay. So subject to the provisions of the act, any contract for resale of a unit in a common interest community shall disclose the unit is located in a common interest community, and the seller or seller's agent is required to obtain from the association a resale certificate. So it's called the same thing, whether it's a POA, condo, or co-op, and provided to the purchaser or purchaser's agent. So the purchaser's agent can now receive the documents again. Now, what this is saying is you can't use old documents that you received if you purchased them and they're less than 1 year old. You still now, the seller has to, or their agent, order a new set of documents. And it's still current as of the date on the documents, but they have to be ordered. And our statute says that if the documents are less than 30 days, more than 30 days, but less than 1 year old, the ones that they ordered when the listing went on the market, or for, afterwards, and if one party kicked it out, it would still be good. Then buyer has the right to order an update, but they don't have the right to void the contract. So just remember, seller has to order them. If they're more than 30 days old or less than a year, the buyer can order an update, but they don't have the right to void on that update unless they were to negotiate enough days in this blank below to accomplish that. Okay. Now, the purchase. So, and then if the purchaser or purchaser agent has the right to request that update of such resale certificate. And 5, we've already looked at the right to receive the resale certificate and right to cancel the contract are waived conclusively if not exercised before settlement. And I do have everyone on mute. So if you want to ask a question about any of this, please unmute yourself and you will be able to ask me the question. All right. So here's the new part of the law. The provisions allow for the buyer cancellation of the contract under the following circumstances. Within X number of days, it can be 0, it can be 30, it can be 10, whatever is negotiated in the contract. I'll discuss that 0 here in a second. Within X number of days after the ratification date of the contract, if the purchaser receives the resale certificate, whether or not complete, or a notice the resale certificate is unavailable, on or before the date that the contract is ratified. Remember, there are 30 items to a complete resale package or notice, okay? So if only 18 items are included, that still starts your time frame, okay? But now they won't be limited to the 3 days. You might put 10 days, whatever, you know, your buyer feels comfortable that it would take them to review the documents, okay? Seller can always counter it, but you can always ask for that amount of time. Now, since most people don't order the documents in advance when they first list the property, then they probably will receive them X number of days afterwards. You know, the law says they have to be given to the party requesting them within 14 days of written request. But if they're given after the contract is ratified, so within X number of days from the date the purchaser receives the resale certificate, whether or not complete, or notice the resale certificate is unavailable if delivery occurs after the contract is ratified. But it's also important to know that any time prior to settlement, if a resale certificate is not delivered to the purchaser, okay, they have the right to void the contract. Now, if these blanks are not filled in with days, then it defaults to the current 3 days. Pursuant to the law and for purposes of this paragraph, ratified real estate contract includes any addenda to contract. If the unit is governed by more than one association, the time frame for the purchaser's right of cancellation shall run from the date of delivery of the last resale certificate. So if someone were to put 0 days, okay, in the blank, have they basically waived the receipt of the documents? No, they still have to be delivered. And here's a little technicality, at least I think, and that is if I put 0 days and these documents aren't handed to me before the contract ratified, I still have all the way up until they are delivered in the day after to void my contract, because it says at any time prior to the documents being delivered. So 0 days simply means that if they're delivered to me today, starting tomorrow, I would not have the right to waive. So don't, be careful when you see 0 days and you tell your seller, well, that means they can't void the contract. That is not the way that I read this as a strict constructionist. So are there any questions about this new change starting July 1st? So if you have real quickly, if you have a listing and you get a contract on it before July 1st, you're still going to be under the old law, the 3 days. If you get it and it's ratified after July 1st, you'll be under the new law.
So how many days should we put in both of these blanks?
Well, once again, it's going to be a function of the market. If it's multiple bids, somebody's going to put 0, but I would not put less than the default, and that's 3 days. But it's really going to be a function of the market, I think. I would prefer like a week for me as a purchaser to have time to actually read through these and see if anything was missing. Okay. But there's no definitive dates yet. Any other questions? Well, this was the simplest class I've had so far in person. Boy, they really have a tough time with this.
So should just put 3 days in both of these blank spaces, in 1 and in 2?
Well, if you leave them blank, they're automatically default for 3 days. Okay. So I would really discuss it with my purchaser, and once again, talk talk about the market. If we have multiple offers, okay, and a purchaser, another purchaser puts 0 and their contract is equal to yours, you probably won't get the property. But if I'm going to put 0 days or even 1 or 2 days, I don't think that's ample time for them to review. Then I'm probably going to use the form to protect yourself about the adverse consequences of your real estate transaction if you don't give yourself a chance to review these documents. Definitely, if they put 0, I want all Fairfax Realty agents using that adverse consequences form, because you need to cover yourself on that instance. Okay. And look, if these documents are going to have, like Penderbrook, when I bought, I'm not exaggerating, there must have been 700 or 800 pages of documents. It takes a little bit of time to review that. Now, the good news is last year, that the POA Condo Act changed, where they all have to use a standard package. And the first page is a table of contents. So you can look at item 1, and if that's the information you're looking for, you go to Appendix 1. If it's an item 10, you go to Appendix 10. So you can find stuff much quicker without having to read through all the documents. Any other questions? Okay, let me cover a couple more items here. Just a lot of housekeeping. And I want to go to paragraph 22 and make sure everybody understands this. Broker compensation. Parties irrevocably instruct settlement agent to pay broker compensation at settlement as set forth in parties' respective brokerage representation agreements. And you might remember this used to say, as agreed to by the listing, by the seller as of the date of, and their listing as of the date of contract. Well, as you know, everything is changing on August 17th, but NVAR is changing their forms now. So whatever the buyer has agreed to pay their agent, or whatever the seller has agreed to pay their agent, or what is contained in the contract. And we're going to see a big contract change. Then I'm waiting until I discuss the changes to the listing agreement to show you that in the sales contract. Okay. Also, just as a reminder, under the default paragraph, okay, under the default paragraph, if either party defaults under this contract, especially if the buyer defaults, the damages are not limited to the earnest money deposit. If you look at this sentence right here, if either buyer or seller is in default, then in addition to all other damages, the defaulting party will immediately pay the cost incurred for title exam, appraisal, survey, and broker compensation in full. So if either party causes a default, they could still be liable to the broker for all their compensation. So be very, very careful how you explain that to people. Now, under definitions, I'm glad they added this back. Okay. Paragraph C. We now have a definition of business day or days. Means any day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday, or a day on which the state or federal government office is closed. Okay. So if I were to change the language in my home inspection to not be days but be business days, then your no Saturday, Sunday, legal holidays, etc., would not be counted. Where this really comes into play is the deposit of the escrow check. Virginia says the broker has 5 business banking days to get it into the bank, but there was always an argument about what that was. Now buyer and seller have agreed in the contract, and we know you don't count Saturday, Sunday, legal holidays, or if the state or federal government office is closed. Okay, so I like that, helped us out. And just as a review, paragraph F, for the purpose of computing time periods, the first day will be the day following delivery, and the time period will end at 9 p.m. on the day specified if the word day is capitalized in the contract. Okay. If it is not capitalized, it would begin the day that it is delivered and end at midnight on the day specified. So always remember when you're computing time periods. Okay. So somebody is asking me a question. Let me check chat and see. Okay, so someone is asking the resale certificate before it could be extended if both parties agree. Can it still be extended, or is that removed? That is not removed. Okay. Matter of fact, that form has been changed to take out the 4 days. It can be negotiated to extend it any number of days you want past what you have in your contract. So technically now, when that buyer asks for that update, they could go back at the same time and ask for this paragraph to be extended for review. But the likelihood of a seller agreeing to extend this too many days and have their house off the market, giving the buyer the right to void a contract, probably not a smart move on their part. That updated form is in your package. We'll take a look at it here before the session's over. Okay, so those are the changes to your sales contract. There's some really interesting changes to the listing agreement and the buyer broker agreement. Bear with me a second. Okay, I want to pull up the laws here again. The changes. I want to take a look at the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, because we have quite a big change here in reflection to the new settlement that takes place here on August 17th, but this is starting July 1 for us. Now you remember starting August 17th that nothing can be printed in Bright MLS as to compensation to the buyer's agent. Okay. So this is what our forms committee came up with. And I really like this, because if you're talking transparency, this can't get too much more transparent. But I want you to understand, these forms are optional. Okay. And a broker does not have to use these. And matter of fact, they may be using VAR, which says something entirely different. So you could still have where a broker is saying my total compensation will be X%, and seller, I would like your permission to give this much to the co-op broker, and then it would still be coming from them. But this is our new system for NVAR. Okay. Listing broker compensation and buyer's broker compensation are fully negotiable and not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law or any MLS service or association of realtors. Now, what they have done, paragraph 6 is the listing brokers portion only. This is not the total compensation. You no longer have the opportunity in this paragraph to get the seller's permission to offer the co-op broker anything. So when you're filling this out, it is the listing companies only. So listing broker compensation, seller will pay broker compensation. It could be a percentage of the gross sales price. It could be a dollar amount, or it could be gross sales price plus dollars. Okay, if during the term of the agreement, anyone produces a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy the property, that means even the seller. So this is an exclusive right agreement. Broker compensation is also earned if within X number of days after expiration or termination of agreement, a contract is ratified with a ready, willing, and able buyer to whom property had been shown during the term of the agreement, provided, however, that broker compensation need not be paid if a contract is ratified on the property while it's listed with another real estate company. That part hasn't changed. Now, this is an interesting concept here. Paragraph B, okay? Additional listing broker compensation for unrepresented buyer. If anyone produces a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy the property, and such buyer is not represented by a broker at the time of ratification of the sales contract, seller will pay broker the following in addition to broker compensation: X% of gross sales price or dollars, or percentage of gross sales price plus dollars. Now, in Virginia, our statute says you have to have a written buyer broker agreement with a party before you can show another company's listing. However, if it's your own company's listing, you are the listing agent, or you are an agent for the company that has the actual listing, you could still have a customer in Virginia, and that would be an unrepresented party. They have not entered into a buyer broker agreement. You have actually used the form that said they are unrepresented, that all agents are representing the seller, the buyer has no representation, and they sign that form. In that case, the brokerage still wants to be paid. So if you need to check box B, okay, if there's an unrepresented party. Now, if there's going to be designated agency and there's going to be a buyer's agent involved, not the listing broker, then there's another paragraph to cover that. But this I like. I always maintained that if a broker said my total compensation is X%, and you're giving me permission to give the co-op broker this much, if there was no co-op broker, then you were only entitled to the portion you said that you were getting. So this really clarifies and spells it out. So the listing agent, I would never enter a dual agency. I would always have an unrepresented buyer on my listing. Okay. Now, teams, you may still want to have, the buyer broker agreement, and the other, that would be up to you and your broker. So everybody understand so far that this is only the listing broker's compensation. There can't be an unrepresented buyer from another company. They'd have to be represented by an agent.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yes, I do
Oh,
understand.
okay, okay,
I was just
good.
waiting, I'm just waiting for you to get to the part where when we're representing buyers, and we know that you can't put in the MLS anymore what the buyer compensation is going to be. But buyers, from what I can understand, the buyer's agents can still be compensated in some fashion or way, right? Is that correct?
Yes, yes, and I'm gonna show you the way that they've set it up for us here. And we're actually gonna look at the buyer broker agreement for that. Okay? Good.
Thank you.
All right, so the rest of this paragraph, this listing, you can still have a variable rate commission, which means that, if there was a co-op fee being offered to the other broker under the old system, and, and which could still be done, then if you're keeping more than you would give to the other side, in other words, up front, I talk to the seller and I say, okay, total compensation will be X%. I'm going to keep Y, give Y to the co-op broker. But if I sell it myself or another party sells it, it will be this. Well, you could still have a variable to this paragraph saying if we're the listing broker and we bring the buyer in also under paragraph B, whatever way you want to do it, if it's going to be a different rate, you would spell it out there. I can't see this really coming into play if there's a co-op broker under our new way that is set up. But, if they're doing it the old way, yes, it could still be. Now, this listing broker service fee is whatever your office is still charging. That is not changed, okay? Or the early termination fee. I'm really concentrating on the changes. Now, here is a new paragraph. Seller paid buyer's broker compensation. This used to be part of the now paragraph 6, where you offered out of a total compensation. Now, seller paid broker compensation. So the seller, you can discuss with the seller for them to pay the buyer's broker compensation in an amount seller will pay to any brokers representing buyer in this transaction. Seller will pay buyer's broker the following amount. It can be a percent, can be a dollar amount, or a dollar amount plus X amount of dollars. Buyer's broker compensation is payable upon settlement. Seller understands that buyer's broker compensation is negotiable and will ultimately be determined by a ratified sales contract between seller and buyer. So now the co-op broker is not offering the compensation. Okay. Now the seller is saying, I will pay this, but it still can't be advertised in Bright MLS. So you will still have
question there. Question.
Yes.
How would we as a buyer know, as a buyer agent know, how much, will they offer us?
You
Do
will
we
now
ask them?
have,
Do we
you
have to
will
ask
now
them
have
or?
to call. You will now have to call the listing broker and ask, or they could put a sign on a rider on their sign in the yard that this is being offered. They could put it in their private website. They could put it on a flyer. They can tell you. It just can't be printed in what? The MLS.
Okay, MLS. Can it email it to you?
They can email it to you. So
okay, they can send it a text or an email too, right?
yeah. So if it's going to be paid, if it's going to be paid by the broker to you, if it's paid by the seller, you don't need to do that. And I'll show you why in a minute. But only if it's coming directly from the broker under the old system. And remember, they don't have to use this. And if they're not a member of NVAR, they can't use our forms. So then you're back to the old way where you have to call and negotiate with the listing broker, and or the buyer could actually put a clause in their contract asking the seller to give them a credit to pay their buyer's agent. but wait until I show you the sales contract in reflection to paragraph 7. Now, the other option, and this is what probably will happen in a lot of instances if they're using the old system. The seller, and the lawsuit allows the seller to offer a subsidy. Okay, but they can't put this subsidy as to pay the buyer's broker. So seller subsidy, and they've added this to spell it out for the seller, is a payment from seller towards buyer's charges and closing costs. Okay, including but not limited to loan origination fees, discount points, buy down or subsidy fees, prepaids or other charges as allowed by the lenders, if any. And they make sure the seller subsidy reduces the total proceeds to the seller at settlement. And the seller has a choice. I'll consider or I will not consider. If I consider, I can do one of two things. I can say, I'll just consider paying closing costs, or I can put an actual percent of the gross sales price or a dollar amount. Now, if the seller is offering to pay the buyer's compensation and a subsidy, they could be on the hook for both. Now, the seller subsidy, it can't be made only if there's a buyer's agent. So if the seller is offering a subsidy under this lawsuit settlement, it has to be made to everybody, even people coming under, back up here, under an unrepresented party buyer. Okay, so what everybody was thinking until our forms committee came out with this, is that the seller would be offering a subsidy, and everybody would know that that meant that was going to ultimately go to the what? To the buyer. I mean, to the buyer's agent, because the buyer would use it to pay their agent. That's not the way this is set up. Okay. So let me go back to our sales contract and show you what's happened there.
Lily, I'm sorry. I have a question about the variable on that listing agreement. Is this a good time to ask you?
Let me do this and then we'll go back to it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So here's the new line under compensation. Okay. Right here. E, seller payment towards buyer's brokerage compensation. So the buyer, even if the seller wasn't offering any compensation, okay, the buyer could still ask for it in the sales contract. You understand what I'm saying? So the other side said, no, we're not offering any. Well, there's nothing to prevent a buyer from asking the seller to pay that buyer's compensation directly to their agent.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
E.
Yeah, I see
Okay.
that. Yes. Yeah, that's
So-
that's what I was thinking. You're right. Yeah, but yeah, that's what I was thinking anyways. They can ask for it in the sales contract. But thanks for clarifying. Thanks for clarifying that, Larry.
So that's only if they're using NVAR forms. Okay, and they're an NVAR member. If they're still going under the old system, okay, but there's still nothing to prevent them from using this contract and asking. So what about a for sale by owner? Okay, well, you don't have, for sale by owner, it used to be in our contingencies and clauses addendum a place for sale by owner, and that they would pay out compensation. Now you just plug it in right here. Okay. Now the seller can always say what? No. Okay.
The seller can always say no. We don't want to pay.
Or they could actually counter.
Or like you said,
buyer
counter with a lesser amount. Yeah.
And then the buyer could counter that if they want. So this is truly now a matter of negotiation, and it's not set or recommended by us. Right? So I actually like what they did when they put this here. Now, what you have to make sure your seller understands, listing agent, when they agree to this, if they default on this sales contract, your seller defaults, then the buyer's brokerage can sue for the compensation. They have earned it under our law in Virginia. So if your buyer's thinking about backing out of a contract and getting the buyer to agree to it, they better also get the broker to agree to it, because they could always sue for their compensation under our statute in the state of Virginia once it's in this contract. Now, we also have seller subsidy to buyer. So another way, it could say actually 0 for seller paid buyer broker compensation, and they credit it to the purchaser under paragraph D, and they can use it whatever way they want. Okay. But I like what we have here. I think it clarifies it and brings it out beautifully.
So Larry, let me just, before you go on, so in this right there, there's a line item for the seller subsidy and a line item for the buyer's brokerage compensation, right? In the
Correct.
contract.
Correct.
Okay, so that's where it's going to be addressed at right here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And if your seller was making an offer of X% to pay the buyer broker compensation, and they were offering a subsidy,
Yes.
It's still negotiable, but
Yeah.
they got to be careful they're not on the hook for both.
Right,
So
but I mean, but it'll be addressed right here on these 2 line items: the seller subsidy and the buyer broker commission. It'll be both on those 2 line items right there, correct?
Absolutely. Now,
Right.
I'm going to play devil's advocate with you guys. Okay, if I'm the seller, I'm not offering any. I'm going to say no. I'm not offering any compensation to the buyer broker. I'll put 0. And here's why. I just want to see when your contract comes in, how much you think you're worth. You understand what I'm saying? If I get multiple contracts in, and one agent's asking X, but the other one's asking Y, and it's more, I may take that into consideration. So I may purposely, as a seller, I'm willing to pay it, but I'm not telling you what it is, because if I tell you what it is, then that's what you're going to stick in there. So I may leave it open and say, yeah, I consider it, but I'm not making a number, just to see what pops up there. Because remember, under the lawsuit settlement, if the compensation offered by the seller is more than you have in your buyer broker agreement, you can no longer accept the higher amount. It stays with the seller.
Larry, can you change the buyer broker agreement? I mean, if the compensation is more?
Well, I've heard attorneys say you could renegotiate, but if you're a buyer, why would you agree to that? Why would you give your buyer agent more than they said they were worth? If anybody's going to get it, I want you to ask the seller to give me a subsidy and the compensation. Why would I agree to pay you more if you didn't think you were worth it up front? And so I take exception with the renegotiating part that attorneys are saying you can do when you find out you can get more, because what the lawsuit was all about is be transparent. Tell me up front. So I'm telling you, ask high in your buyer broker agreement. If less comes in, then you can negotiate down. But I just don't like this idea of negotiating up, because it said it can't be as per MLS anymore, and it's got to be a definite amount. So when somebody says, well, they offered more, then I think you're going back, to as per what they offered. And that's why I said, as a seller, I'm going to offer what? Offer to pay it, but I'm not going to give you a number.
So Larry, what you're saying in the listing agreement, seller could just say, put nothing on the subsidy.
Sure. They could put nothing for subsidy, they could put nothing for buyer broker
Buyer
agreement.
broker, and
And-
but then on
and-
on the
but that does
contract
not-
they can negotiate.
Yes, but that does not prevent the buyer from asking for the compensation on the contract.
Right.
Just because they said no. And before I was gonna have to call the other broker and say, you know, do you offer any compensation? And they say no. And I'd say, well, let me go back. Then I couldn't say I won't show your listing. I would say I've got to go back to my client and see what they would like to do. Okay. And their option now would just be added to the sales contract to send it over. And look, if the seller has had their house on the market for a week or so and they've got no offers, okay, and one comes in where compensation is being asked for, now it's their choice, right? But we're not eliminating the property as buyer agents. We're not eliminating it.
So, one more question here. So the buyer agent could start negotiating before even
There's nothing
sending a contract.
Under our code of ethics, there's nothing to prevent us calling the other side to negotiate the commission. Okay. Under our code of ethics. Okay.
Okay.
Now, I want to bring up the buyer broker agreement and go over what it says for clarification. So this is the exclusive right to represent buyer broker agreement starting July 1. Okay. Compensation. And once again, lawsuit settlement said it had to be highlighted and, you know, right up front, we put it so you don't misunderstand. It's fully negotiable, not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law, any MLS or association of realtors. So buyer's broker compensation, okay, will pay the broker an amount of percent or gross sales price. And our law says it has to be ascertainable. So put an exact percentage. You can't put as per MLS, or it doesn't cost you anything because somebody else pays it. That's all against the law, right? Of gross sales price, or it could be a dollar amount. If they enter into a contract to acquire any real property during the term of the agreement, go to settlement on that contract at any time thereafter. Buyers responsible for payment of the broker compensation at settlement. Nobody else. Okay. But they can ask for it. Okay. You'll see that. If broker receives any compensation from seller or seller's representative for services covered by agreement. Okay. So the broker could still do it the old way, or the new way is from the seller. That amount will be credited toward buyer's obligation to pay broker compensation. You will notice it no longer says, if too much comes in, we get to keep it. The lawsuit said you had to have an exact amount. And I know there's lawyers out there saying it's completely negotiable. You could always go back and negotiate with your buyer. I don't understand how that's any different than what we had before, where it said too much, you can keep it. Are you going to tell me as a buyer that you're worth more now because the seller will give you more? I just don't buy that. If I'm a buyer, I'm saying, hey, look, if anybody's going to get it, it's me. If it's more, then let's ask for X percent that they give me a credit to help with my closing costs and what we've agreed to under the paragraph for the seller to pay you directly. Okay. Now, you need to check this box Buyer will request seller contribution to broker compensation in the amount of gross sales price or dollar amount and offers to purchase property. Buyer understands that seller contribution is negotiable and will ultimately be determined by a ratified sales contract between buyer and seller by using that line under paragraph 2 of our sales contract. Okay, so you spell it out. You can also have a retainer fee, and this is where your broker service fee goes. So you need to check those boxes and put in the fees. Okay. So I like these changes. I like the way our forms committee did this. It makes it what the court lawsuits were all about, transparent. And transparent means just tell me the truth right up front. Okay,
Larry,
And-
can I ask you a quick question?
sure.
So if we put in a buyer broker agreement from our buyers with 2.5%, that's okay. And then explain to them that if the seller is offering less, they are obligated, according to this agreement, to pay the residual amount, right? For instance, if
Right.
the seller is offering 2%, then they understand they have to pay 0.5%, correct?
Correct. Or
Okay.
you could,
Now,
or you could agree to negotiate it down.
or we can negotiate down. So if we go 3%, and we can negotiate that down, correct?
Yes. Yes. So I'm recommending that we aim high,
Yeah.
get less, take less, if you want.
Okay.
Okay.
And where would we
But don't go
say?
the
Where
other,
would we say? Where
don't
would
go
we say?
low.
take less?
Don't go low and then try to negotiate up. That doesn't make
Right.
sense.
Right. But where would we say we would take less? That's just we would just if they offer less. I mean, is there?
Well, that
Does
would be a negotiation between you guys. I wouldn't put it in
Okay.
here, because if you
I
put it in
understand.
here, that makes it variable, you
Yeah.
know, and they're saying it has to be ascertainable, and that's not ascertainable. So just tell them what you want. It's not based on what another party pays, but we will ask them to what? We will ask them to give us that percent in the sales contract, and it's completely negotiable, and it could go back and forth. And then you could discuss it with them. If you had a higher number and it's less than the contract, you could discuss it with them and just have that agreement, to lower it. And this is a lot to take in the first time. I realize that. But I like this new system.
So Larry, if in this a buyer agreement, buyer broker's agreement, we put, let's say 3%, and the seller actually is paying 2.5% to the buyer's broker, then we'll accept that 2.5% from the seller, and then we could actually negotiate 0.5 from the buyer, or we could just negotiate don't pay anything, correct?
Yeah, that's because that's a negotiation between the broker and their client, the buyer.
Right.
Okay. And
Okay.
remember, no matter what's offered from the other side, it doesn't prevent the buyer from asking a higher number in the contract.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So,
Right.
but if they put a lower number in the contract and the seller was offering more, you can't accept it under this lawsuit settlement.
And the subsidy is known in the MLS, right? So it's already there for the subsidy.
Yes, but there will be changed to where they can offer a dollar amount, or just we're offering it, but there's no dollar amount included.
Okay.
So the seller can say, yes, I'm willing to offer a subsidy and not put an amount, or they could put an amount of a subsidy.
Right. Because the seller wants to see what the contract is gonna ask,
Yeah,
basically.
so now it's really gonna be a negotiation between the buyer and the seller.
Right. Right.
And
Basically, we're gonna be
VA
doing negotiation than before.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
and then one more question on the variable on the listing agreement, can we just put nothing there?
Yes, it doesn't, you only use that, just put NA, okay?
NA, okay. And so if we are going to have a listing, let's say July 1, so these are going to be available for us, or should we
These forms,
start?
these forms begin July 1.
Right. But then what I'm trying to say, like a listing agreement, so I have a meeting already with my client July 1st. So I'll
On July
explain-
1st, on July 1st, these will be the forms that will be in NVAR's library and online.
but
if
what
you-
about the zip form?
But it should be in zip form also.
Okay. And then but then again so okay, never mind.
If here's where I think you're gonna be a little sticky wicky. And that is, if you take a listing between now and July 1, I would go back and amend my listing with this new form, new way of doing it, because July 1, there won't be any opportunity to show a co-op fee in there at all. Okay.
right.
And so you might want to go back and revisit it with the seller when the new forms are. And you might want to, if you're going to take a listing between now and then, you might share the changes that are coming and just tell them. We
Yeah,
can't use
definitely.
ones until July
Definitely.
1st, and then but July 1st, we'll switch over to this new system.
Right. So we might even do coming soon, like, in a week before July, July 1 and end of June.
Yes.
Okay.
So somebody
then-
says here, if we put a higher commission in the buyer broker agreement, but the buyer wants to pay a lower commission, what additional form should be completed so the buyer knows we will commit to the lower price in the event the seller? It would just be something you put in writing to yourself. There is no forms or anything for it.
So we can draft up an additional addendum to the buyer broker agreement.
Or just put something.
Yeah, sign it
Right.
and make it an addendum to the buyer broker agreement
Yeah.
to that effect.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
and remember, it's the brokers.
Yes.
The brokers, so they give it to you. So, make sure that you're in line with your brokerage, how they want to handle it, or your management.
Okay,
Okay.
Larry, I have a
Because
question.
I can't tell you what to do there because I'm not the broker of any of these offices. I'm just a consultant.
Larry, I have a question.
Okay.
I have a listing today, and then but by July 1st, I don't receive any offer yet. But today I have to put a commission on the part on the Bright MLS. Do I
Uh-huh.
need to change anything by July 1st? Do I have to take out,
Well,
like, for example,
anything that you have in the commission in Bright MLS on August 17th will disappear.
okay.
But
Oh.
no, technically you wouldn't, but I think I would just prepare my people for this and say, look, this is going to be our new system afterwards. I'll meet with you, July 1 or later to discuss this, or you could just amend it technically, but, right. But for the next 2 weeks, we'll have the old system.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Larry, I have a question if you don't mind.
Okay.
I know that sounds silly, but is there any way we can get a template? For example, like you give us an example, let's say a property for $1 million, and we can just fill in and we can change something that we don't understand. Is there a possibility we can have something like this?
I'm not sure I follow that question. Try that again.
Okay, is there any way, like, for example, these new contracts, is there a way we can get a contract that's filled in as an example? Let's say for like, a property for $1 million, and how is everything going to be distributed?
My suggestion is going to be that you meet with your manager for that. And, you know, they will help you through that.
Okay, understand.
Okay.
Thank you, Larry.
All right, well, here's the deal. Next Monday, I will meet, but we're gonna have to change the time because I can't do it at 11. If you want another session next week, I will do it at 3. And we'll put a notice out that I will be here at 3 next Monday. Because there's some forms, other changes to forms, and I'm sure after this sinks in, you'll have some other questions. So next Monday, I will be doing this at 3 in the afternoon.
Do you have time for one more quick question?
Sure.
As a listing agent, and we explained to the seller that, you know, if you don't offer any buyer compensation, is may unlikely to get a buyer.
Well, don't
So
say that. That's against
I'm
the
not-
law.
yeah, but I'm just saying that I would suggest that, you know, you offer 2.5% to the
No,
buyer.
don't do that. That's exactly a violation of the law.
So what should we do to get to see if they will offer buyer compensation, you know, because
See, and that's what this lawsuit was all about, is that we had a figure that everybody would not show it unless it was at least this much money.
no, we're not going to show it, but
No,
I mean,
no. By
if it's going to
saying
be
that people-
offered,
by saying that people won't show your listing if you're not offering compensation, you can't do that. But
okay,
what
what do we do?
I would probably say, let's make sure you understand our marketplace, okay?
Yes, yes,
Most purchasers using a VA, okay, use a VA
Right.
because they don't have money to pay their agent, okay?
yes, Right.
Most people using FHA probably the same way, or 5 or 10% down. So, you know, if I want you to be prepared, if you're not offering any compensation, that our contract form now allows a buyer to come and ask for compensation and negotiate with you. So it shouldn't matter whether they're offering anything or not. Okay. And what you have to make sure is the buyer, our lawsuit settlement said, you can't filter out any listings. Not electronically, not by hand. You
Right,
have to
understood.
make every property available to your buyer. And they
Right.
have the right to negotiate this fee, and they can negotiate it in a sales contract with the seller now.
Larry,
So
sorry.
negotiate our broker, our buyer commission?
You can negotiate, they can offer, and look, it's not going to take long for people to figure out we don't work for free.
Right.
Okay,
um,
that we
Larry,
bring a valuable service to everyone, and you have to be able to tell them what that valuable service is. Okay,
Mhm.
and
Right.
you know, and why you're worth the money. But when we
Yeah.
can't say, you know, you have to offer at least this much or no one to show your listing. That is a
No.
direct violation
No,
of the
no,
law.
no, we're not. No, we're not. I'm not saying that, but
And
like
look,
you said,
you-
there's very
if-
few buyers that could pay their closing costs and their buyer broker
correct.
agree,
So,
you know.
and VA has also now said that they're suspending where the buyer cannot pay the fee until they can come
No,
up with.
no, Larry, you better check that again, because they said, a lender just told me yesterday, the VA said they can now pay up to 2%.
I just said the lender that they can pay their fee. It is
Oh, okay,
it has been temporarily lifted until they can come up with a new regulation. But it
Right.
said if it's customary and usual for it to be paid in the area where they are working, not across the board. So in our area, they could do it. Okay. But do not write anything in the contract that the seller is giving a credit to the buyer to pay it. Use the language that's in our contract, and that's a savior. Okay. They still say it can be reimbursed on their behalf, but they can't pay it. So it should be okay with the contract the way that it's structured now for us. And somebody else was trying to get a question in there, so. Let me hear it.
Larry, I have a just quick question. As a seller's agent, what would be a form or any protection on my end? For example, I put a listing and the seller doesn't want to pay anything to the buyer. And
Uh-huh.
then after 2, 3 weeks, nobody is making an offer to my listing. And then suddenly the seller say, okay, I'm willing to give. Now there are some other agents, buyer agents who called me and I already told them like, hey, we're not going to pay anything. And then suddenly on the 3rd week, my seller decided like, okay, I'm going to give something. These buyer's agents would be upset or might complain like, hey, Mila, you told me like you're not
look,
offering.
I
they
What
won't
would
be
I
up,
do?
they won't be upset. Just say my seller has asked me to call you back and say that they are willing to consider paying compensation if your client's still interested. Don't worry about them being upset, because when we start worrying about them being upset, then we're still worried about are we getting together and fixing these fees? Okay.
Larry,
Yes.
I'm sorry, but why do we have to tell them that yes, the seller is not paying anything for buyer's commission, but at the same time we can just say that send us an offer and put, just like you showed us, that
You
you can
shouldn't be
ask
telling
for.
you shouldn't be telling a buyer's agent how to negotiate against your seller. Just say no, but please send a contract and I'll take it to the seller for their consideration.
So, I mean, the agents need to understand that that is an option on the contract, sales
Well,
contract, so they can just.
Hopefully they have somebody in their company that just went over it like we just did.
Right. So,
And I go over this. I go
personally
over
would
this in my
say,
CE classes and whatever, but if people don't want to learn, there's nothing we can do to teach the rest of them. They'll have to learn by experience.
that's
Okay?
correct. Correct.
My job is to make sure our agents are doing it properly. Okay. Now, if I have a seller that doesn't want to offer any compensation, I'm fine with that. But let me make this suggestion to you, seller. I will set you up in our system as a purchaser looking to buy your own home in the MLS. And then you will receive a notice anytime any property goes under contract. You will receive a notice anytime a new property comes on the market. You'll receive a notice anytime anybody adjusts the price. Let them see other things in the market selling. They'll put 2 and 2 together. Okay. But right now, I don't think that it's going to be that big of a change, because sellers understand, and if it's a competitive market, the only reason these lawsuits happened, in my opinion, is we've been stuck in a market where there was supposedly a lack of inventory, okay, which to me means lack of listed properties, not lack of homes to sell. So,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
and this will change in the future. And what's going to get interesting when it changes in the future, sellers will be offering everything in the world to get buyer agents to bring their buyers to their houses. And the first thing they're going to do is offer a bonus, which we can no longer accept. Now, that's when it's going to get interesting. When the market shifts, you'll be talking to me about another situation, right? But right now, if we're limiting buyers only to listed properties, then face that compensation. But if I expand the market, then find unlisted properties, then I'm worth probably more to my buyer client than if I'm just restricting them only to listed properties in the system. It all bases on the value of you as an agent. And you're going to have to tell people why I get paid and why I'm worth the money. And luckily we can put in that blank in the contract, asking the seller to pay us, because the buyer asked us to ask the seller to pay us. Okay? Well, thank you for joining me, and that's the update to your laws and your forms that I want you to have for today. And
Well,
next
thank you, Larry.
Monday,
Thank you, Larry.
you guys are welcome, and I'll see you guys next Monday at 3 in the afternoon if you want to join me at that time.
In your humble opinion,
Thanks.
professional opinion, we're probably gonna get to the same street by taking a different side road, right? I mean,
Yeah.
do you see anything pretty much changing other than what it is now?
No,
The way it is now?
the only thing that changed in Virginia by this lawsuit is that you can no longer put the commission in MLS. Our law already required everything else that was in there since 1995. It's just now people are going to have to pay attention to what was in our law since 1995 in the state of Virginia. Okay.
Received.
So agents that can adjust to this are going to double their income. Agents that don't want to adjust and stick to the old system are going to be gone. Okay. And it's reality. So I like this new way. I think it's terrific. I think it's a golden opportunity for good agents to rise to the top.
I hear you.
Okay. And thank
Thank
you
you.
guys. Thank you
Thank you,
guys so
Larry.
much for joining me today.
Thank
And
you.
I will definitely be here next week at 3 p.m. and we will further discuss anything you'd like.
I'm sorry, Larry, did you say that we'll be getting these draft
It was
forms?
in the chat. There's a link to in the chat section of this. So if you go to chat,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't see anything. That's why I
well,
was
chat, it's from Jocelyn Diaz. The first one under chat has a link to all this stuff.
Ashley, I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you again next week.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you,
you.
Larry. Bye.